Thursday, May 5th. Welcome to another edition of the 7th Inning Stretch podcast. I'm your host, Matt Antonio. You can find me on Twitter at MattOnJays. Don't forget to head on over to jaysbach.com for content throughout the season. But today we're going to check in on the Blue Jays after having just completed a 6-4 homestand where they took 3 out of 4 from the Boston Red Sox, 2 out of 3 from the Houston Astros, and 1 out of 3 from the New York Yankees. So 6-4 on the 10-game homestand. 7-3 would have been nice, but alas, we will take the 6-4, and they currently sit at 16-10 through their first 26 games. So what are the Blue Jays right now? They're a team that as advertised, has very good starting pitching. The bullpen, the back end has been very good. Middle relief, a little bit wonky, and that's why we've seen a couple of these more lopsided losses. And the offense, despite all of the expectations, have not really yet delivered the type of performances that we were expecting. And, a lot of that, and we'll get into this a little bit, is, of course, the well-documented issues hitting with runners in scoring position. Let's do a little bit more recap right now. Props to Yusei Kikuchi, his first win as a Blue Jay on Wednesday evening. A brilliant performance against the Yankees. 6 innings pitched, only 1 run allowed on a home run to Joey Gallo. We have read and heard that he has been making some mechanical adjustments with pitching coach Pete Walker, and they have taken a little bit of time to sort of translate into results during games. And this is another guy who likely impacted by that shortened spring training. Did not sign with the Blue Jays until spring training had begun in March. That's probably a signing that would have happened in February or January, and he would have been able to have a full amount of time to work with the pitching staff, the coaching staff, and get those adjustments made before the season began. But with only a handful of starts and opportunities to make those adjustments. And then, of course, things are even more different once the games count. In spring training, you can make those adjustments, but you're not seeing a full lineup of everyday players, certainly not 3 times through the order in spring training. So it was always going to take some time, and Kikuchi likely impacted by that. If he can turn in many more performances like that, 6 strong innings, 3 runs or less, 3 runs last night wouldn't have been enough to win, but you'll certainly take that from a guy who's your 4th or 5th starter. So good to see him turn things around after a couple of rocky starts against Houston in his previous 2 outings. And that was actually the first game on Wednesday night that the Blue Jays had won when he was starting. Not just a game that he was the winning pitcher. First time that he started a game that the Blue Jays ended up winning. Of course, one of those was the game in Houston where Jordan Romano blew his only save of the year. But if they had won that game, it certainly would not have been because of him, because he was knocked out early. So we go back to that 6-4 homestand. Interestingly enough, 5 of the 6 wins were by 1 run. So they've already got 10 1-run victories this season. According to Sportsnet stats, their 10th such win last year did not come until August in the 128th game of the season. So they have certainly been walking that 1-run game tightrope. They lost one on Monday against the Yankees. They won one of them on Wednesday. Their losses on the homestand, one of them was by 1 run, as mentioned, but a loss by 6 runs, by 4 runs, and by 8 runs. So when they're winning narrowly, and when they lose, they're losing big. That's actually the complete opposite of what it was last year. Of course, they had that great run differential that led us to believe that better things were coming. And the case last year where they were losing a lot of close games and they were winning a lot of blowouts. They had a great run differential because they were winning games by 7, 8, 10 runs, and sort of those add-on runs that I don't want to say they don't mean anything, but kind of empty calories, if you will, in terms of what those runs actually meant. So I still expect that trend to turn around. I do expect them to improve with runners in scoring position. I expect them to continue the strong work by the starting pitching and have to rely on that elite bullpen a little bit less moving forward. Speaking of things that I'm not concerned about, we'll talk about Bo Bichette, who has really started to turn things around at the plate. So I think everybody knew that his offense was going to be fine. In this past week, it's really started to click. If you go back to Sunday when he hit that big home run, and he's had a few multi-hit games over the last week, now maybe a little bit of concern in some areas about his defense. An error on Tuesday night that led to the big inning. A tough play, ground ball from Giancarlo Stanton that was off the bat at 119 miles an hour. The hardest hit ball in all of baseball this year. Kind of ate him up. Wild throw. Had another bit of a wild play. So the throws have been a little erratic. We've seen some great plays, but we've also seen some, routine plays kicked aside. Overall, I do expect him to be okay. We saw all the the strides he made from the beginning of the year. We see the evidence of him putting in the work, and he's still a young player. And I expect things to be okay. I did read one article today that, or earlier this week, that speculated maybe it's time to move him over to second base. When with Santiago Espinal playing so well defensively, he's a natural shortstop. Maybe make the switch there. I don't think that is necessary at this point. I want to give Bo another full season and maybe even one more. Remember, this is a guy who's still just 24 years old. And is, he's in his fourth season already, but I think we can expect him to continue to improve defensively. I don't think he's a finished product, and you want him at that premium position of shortstop. Speaking of defense, I'm just sort of running through some random notes here before we dive into some of the bigger picture things. I really feel for Bradley Zimmer. He's such a great defender, and his value is very important to the Jays in terms of him being the backup center fielder to George Springer. But I really feel bad for him because I think, he's been awful offensively. I believe he's only got 2, maybe 3 hits, one of them a bunt single and one of them a home run off of Justin Verlander in a park that would be the only park that was a home run with that short fence in left field. So really, really weird. And, we knew that he had struggled offensively in years past and not really lived up to the potential that he showed in the minor leagues and as a prospect. But he's certainly better than this, and a guy who got traded to Toronto on the eve of opening day. And I've spoken about how the short training camp for players switching teams has not been ideal, and him didn't even spend any training camp or time in camp with the Blue Jays. He was traded over the night before opening day, didn't get to the team until after they were done the first series, and I'm sure it's just kind of a whirlwind, and now everything's kind of snowballed. But I do believe his roster spot will be secure even when Teoscar Hernandez returns from the injured list, which could be as early as Thursday evening. By the time you're listening to this, we may already know. But I think just given his role as the backup center fielder and the guy who's going to start when George Springer is taking a DH day, despite his really poor offensive numbers, I do think he feels safe. Speaking of Hernandez's return, that's going to be great news, certainly for the offense that could use a jolt in terms of run production. But it means, probably a little less time for Bradley Zimmer and less time for Raimel Tapia, who's pretty much been an everyday player because Hernandez has been injured. But I do wonder if maybe we do continue to see Tapia because they're going to want to use the outfielders in that DH spot. Certainly we know that Springer's going to DH at least once a week, if not more. Hernandez coming back from an oblique strain, likely going to want to, sort of get him off the field and but keeping his bat in the lineup at least one day a week. We've seen Gurriel DH a lot, but also just because those guys can function as elite designated hitters, and they haven't gotten a lot of production out of that position. The expectation was Alejandro Kirk was going to be the DH with Danny Jansen catching, and Zach Collins was brought in to catch a bit. But with Jansen going out, Kirk has essentially been the everyday catcher and caught in a lot more. This past week, we've seen Tyler Heineman more, and I think it's because we've seen the amount of catching that Kirk has to do really having an impact on his offense. And we see this often with young catchers when they're asked to catch more. Game plan, you've got a game plan, you've got to focus on your defense, focus on the opposing lineup. It can really impact your offense, and we saw that early in Danny Jansen's career, how much focusing on the catching aspect of that position impacted his offense, and he was a good offensive prospect coming up. And this year and late last year, we started to see Jansen turn the corner a little bit, and I think that's having a really big impact on Kirk's offense. And they were expecting him to be the DH probably about 50 to 55% of the time, with Jansen catching, and then he would mix in as catcher. But and he has made improvements in his defense and his game calling, and that's great. But it's limited what they've gotten out of him offensively. Still doesn't have an extra base hit on the season. And just, hasn't, among many guys who have not quite hit their stride offensively yet. So the return of Teoscar Hernandez could mean is likely going to mean, Kirk is going to remain catching a little bit more. I think when we see Danny Jansen return, hopefully sometime next week, maybe next weekend, thinking about maybe that series in Tampa Bay, maybe for the series in New York, but that feels unlikely at this point. So if Jansen can return next weekend in Tampa Bay, then I think you see Kirk start to DH a little bit more, and maybe we see his offensive numbers start to increase as well. And Zach Collins, who had been, kind of that lefty bat in the DH spot with Kirk catching, he's cooled down a bit as well after a bit of a hot start when he initially came over. After 2 or 3 really bad games, he had that hot week, and now he's cooled down a bit as well. And of course, they've faced left-handed starters 3 of the last 4 games through that New York series that just finished, so we didn't really see him as much. But with 3 right-handed starters for Thursday, Friday, Saturday on the docket for Cleveland, I expect we will see Zach Collins in the lineup through this weekend. So the Jays, they do get Cleveland this weekend. Cleveland, a team that's under 500, so a little bit of a sort of softer spot in the schedule. We talked about how difficult that schedule was going to be for the Jays right out of the gate, but I'm not really sure that it's been quite as tough as we sort of made it out to be. If you look at some of their opponents, Texas is a team that's below 500. That was their first 3 games of the year. Texas is 10-14. Oakland's 10-15. The Red Sox are 10-15. And even their games not against the Jays and Red Sox have played 7 times. The Red Sox are still under 500 in games not against Toronto. They're 8-10. Houston is a team that's above 500 at 14-11, but they're about a 500 team if you remove their games against the Jays. So the opposing winning percentage for teams that the Blue Jays have played already this year is actually under 500 at 488, and that includes the 15-7 New York Yankees, who have a 720 winning percentage. So it's been a tough start. All those games against the Yankees, 7 games so far against the Yankees, and the Red Sox, despite their record, have always played the Jays tough, and those 6 games against Houston, who's a good team. But they've had a couple of soft spots there with Texas and Oakland. It doesn't get much easier. They do get this 4-game series against Cleveland. Cleveland is 11-13 to start the year. But then they've got the Yankees, and I believe I said the Yankees were 15-7 earlier. They're 18-7, and Tampa Bay is 15-10. So the winning percentage of the teams on this upcoming 10-game road trip is it's a 595 winning percentage. So that's still a tough stretch of games. Then once you get through that, it's Seattle, who's hovering around 500, Cincinnati, who is awful, might be one of the worst teams in MLB history. So that's when things will start to turn around, but we still got to get through another tough 10 games, albeit a nice start to this road trip with 4 in Cleveland. Though I should mention, there is significant rain in the forecast for Cleveland on Friday. According to the Weather Network app, potentially about 30 to 40 millimeters of rain expected in Cleveland on Friday. That lingers into Saturday as well. So at this point, again, I'm recording just after 1 o'clock on Thursday afternoon before that series begins. Possible rain out Friday, possible rain out Saturday as well, or maybe a doubleheader in there somewhere. And the Guardians just completed a doubleheader on Wednesday. So their pitching, they used a lot of pitchers yesterday. So this, could be coming at a good time for the Blue Jays to be facing the Guardians. And you talk about Cleveland as a team. I'm jumping ahead a little bit here in my rundown, but the starting pitching for Cleveland so far this year, a 4.15 ERA, a 124 whip, and a 237 opponent batting average. That opponent batting average is 14th best in the league, but that you like that 4.15 starters ERA. Could be a chance for the Jays to take advantage of some softer starting pitching. And Thursday night starter Aaron Savali, he's got an ERA over 10 right now, has not completed 5 innings yet this year. He's given up 12 runs combined in his last 2 starts. So certainly an opportunity for the Blue Jays to take advantage of that. All right, I want to continue talking about the runners in scoring position struggles that the Blue Jays have had. Their ranks in terms of offenses across the league. 172 batting average with runners in scoring position. That is last in the league. A 244 on base percentage. That is last in the league. A 298 slugging percentage. That is last in the league. And obviously their OPS at just 541 with runners in scoring position. That is 30th in the league. You compare this to where they were last year. Their 270 batting average was second best in the league, and their 811 OPS was third in the league. So they've had a dramatic fall off in production with runners in scoring position. Last year, the worst team in the league with runners in scoring position was Pittsburgh, who hit 220. So, we talk about batting average all the time. They're essentially decimals. So Pittsburgh hits 22% of the time with runners in scoring position last year. The Blue Jays right now, with runners in scoring position, they're getting a hit 17% of the time. So 5 percentage points lower than the worst team in the league last year. And if you go back even the last 5 or 6 years, the worst team in the league is consistently hitting between 220 and 230 with runners in scoring position at the end of the year. So the Jays are even well below that, which just goes to show they absolutely will not be this bad throughout the course of the year. Even just the laws of regression suggest that they will have some improvement in that category. But even if you look at the players on this team, they are all capable of producing more than what we've seen right now. So let's take a look at some of their stats. Career with runners in scoring position, last year in that category, and then this year. George Springer, career 262 hitter. Last year, surprisingly low, only 220. This year, he's at 227. Bo Bichette, a career 314 hitter with runners in scoring position. Last year, he hit 340 with runners in scoring position. This year, 182. A significant drop off for Bo Bichette. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is actually around his career average. Career 289. This year, 286. Last year, 315. Lourdes Gurriel Jr., a career 299 hitter with runners in scoring position. That's very good. Last year, he was one of the best in the league at 368. This year, you're not going to believe it, 105 with runners in scoring position. He has I believe it's 4 hits with runners in scoring position, but he has 7 RBIs in that situation. I believe he's got 2 sacrifice flies as well. Alejandro Kirk has historically struggled in that situation, a career 180 hitter. Last year was 191. This year he's hitting 071 with runners in scoring position. And as mentioned, still does not have an extra base hit. Matt Chapman, a career 258 hitter with runners in scoring position. Last year was 228. This year, 192. So listen just to those numbers this year. Springer, 227, Bichette, 182, Guerrero, 286, Gurriel, 105, Kirk, 071, and Chapman, 192. Those are guys that you would expect to be able to deliver in those clutch situations. And so a guy who they could really use is Teoscar Hernandez, a career 277 hitter with runners in scoring position, and last year hit 323. This year, so far, just 1 for 4 with runners in scoring position, but that was that big 3-run home run on opening day. So adding Hernandez back in, you put him in the cleanup spot behind Vlad. That drops Gurriel down to 5th. A little bit less pressure for him. Kirk and Chapman will sort of drop a spot in the order as well, and I think just the addition of Teoscar Hernandez is going to help. Plus, it does seem like some guys are starting to hit their stride. Bo's hitting a little bit better. We saw Vlad with 2 really nice hits on Tuesday night. And so guys, they're just going to start to find their groove. You add Hernandez back in, you add Jansen back in, and I do think that this team is primed for an offensive breakout, and we could see that as early as this weekend. And then you never know, a great weekend can build some positive momentum into the 2-game series in New York next week, which they have an off day Monday and an off day Thursday, so an opportunity to get some rest. Reminder, they're in the middle of a stretch. They've played 16 consecutive days without an off day at this point, 4 more before that off day on Monday. So a little bit of rest, some softer pitching matchups can certainly go a long way. All right, let's just address some final tidbits here before we wrap things up. I thought it was interesting that on Wednesday, the Jays added Casey Lawrence to the roster, activating him to both the 25 and adding him to the 40-man roster. They had to designate Gosuke Kato for assignment. Hopefully he is able to pass through waivers and the Jays keep him in the organization because he was a useful player while he was up. He was sort of victim to the rosters being trimmed from 28 to 26 at the end of April, but and a good story with him grinding through so many years in the minor leagues and finally getting his shot with the Jays and making his MLB debut, picking up his first hit as well. So, but Casey Lawrence has been working in Buffalo as a starter. I don't believe the Jays have plans to use him as a starter, especially with, as mentioned, those 2 off days next week. Then they've got another off day the following week. So, maybe just another arm for the bullpen who can add some length, but there should be some roster moves on the way. Teoscar Hernandez is going to be activated. If not for the start of the series on Thursday, then certainly it looks like by the weekend. The Blue Jays are carrying only a 3-man bench right now, and with Hernandez coming back, I would like to see them lose a pitcher so that they could have a 4-man bench, and 2 of those 3 guys right now are catchers. So just having a little bit more versatility, although it could be Vinny Capra, who was brought up for Kevin Biggio, although he was sort of a bonus spot on the 40-man roster. So I think he would have to stay up until Biggio is activated. So a lot of balls in the air in terms of what's going to happen when Teoscar Hernandez returns. Kevin Biggio sounds like he's going to be out on a rehab assignment this week after missing some time with COVID, and then the Jays might use that opportunity to sort of give him an extended rehab stint in AAA to sort of help him get a stretch of games and find his offense, because he's hitting under 100 in his appearances this year. And what happens when Hyunjin Ryu returns? There's some talk about him piggybacking with Ross Stripling, depending on how deep into games he can get. Are they still going to carry 3 catchers when Danny Jansen returns? That was the plan through April. They had Jansen, Kirk, and then added Zach Collins. Is that still going to be the plan? It was unclear whether they were going to try and keep those 3 catchers once the rosters were trimmed down at the end of April. Now, they still do have the 3 catchers on the roster, but I think they're doing that because Kirk is not a guy who's going to catch 5 days a week. Heineman's not a guy who's bat you want in the lineup that often, and I don't think they're really crazy about Zach Collins as a catcher. He's more of a guy who's going to be a DH type and catch maybe once a week or so. So it'll be interesting to see, do they still carry 3 catchers when Danny Jansen comes back, or do they maybe option Alejandro Kirk to Buffalo to let him catch more consistently and sort of fine-tune his craft there, and he's a guy who's struggling offensively. I don't think it would be crazy to send him down to Buffalo to try and sort of find his groove offensively as well. So those are all sort of decisions that are going to have to be made in the next week or so. Ryu is making a rehab start on Saturday for Buffalo. I'm not sure if that's in Buffalo or on the road, but he will be pitching for Buffalo on Saturday. It sounds like Danny Jansen probably going to be joining him, and Kevin Biggio could be there as well. So lots of roster moves potentially to be made, and knock on wood, no new injuries added to the mix as the Blue Jays finally start to get healthy. And then the last sort of piece to the puzzle would be to get Nate Pearson back onto the big league roster. He has not pitched for the big league club yet this year, as he sort of gets over his bout with mono and builds his stamina back up. And I think he would look really good out of that bullpen as well. A guy who you could use as a 1-inning guy when some of the other higher leverage guys need a day off, or a guy who could pitch 2 or 3 innings if one of your starters is knocked out early. So I think we're going to see Nate Pearson. It doesn't sound like he's going to be up until maybe late May or early June at this point, although that will depend on how well he progresses with his rehab outings and all of that. So a lot of interesting things going on roster-wise, and it will be nice for the Blue Jays to see a new team this weekend in the Guardians, the first time they're playing Cleveland since the name change this year, and just a different look than the Boston, New York, Houston that they had seen for the last 3 weeks. So I'm anticipating a good week for the Blue Jays, if a soggy one, and hopefully they get in as much baseball as possible and don't have to deal too much with the inclement weather. Should be a good weekend. Don't forget, you can find me on Twitter at MattOnJays. You can head on over to jaysbach.com for more great content throughout the season, and at least for the month of May. I mentioned this on Twitter. The schedule is hopefully to do these podcasts on Thursdays, with another off day on Thursday next week and a late start to their game Thursday the following week. It seems like Thursdays will be the best days to do these midweek, recap what's happened so far, and set up the weekend. So I hope you will join me throughout the year. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.